Okay. All right. So I'm back. A little late as usual. Uh, straight up. At least you're consistent, right? Consistent with being late. All right. So this is what we're doing again. So we're going to go back to this text on the protocols, and I guess I tried to like be not so forward with saying what I'm reading from because I know what YouTube's gonna do, and they did it anyway. So they've limited my reach on a few different platforms. So it is what it is. Whatever. Um, so we're on page 73, and we're on. It's the history of the protocols. It's an American translation of, I guess, a Russian text by Oleg Platonov. That's what I'm reading from, and hope everybody's all right. And so we're going to start. It says, in Russia and those many thousands who have recently immigrated to other countries, moreover, the revolution in Russia is Jayish, and also Jays are the most active revolutionaries of the Tsar's empire. The last edition of the book by Nihilus, there is near the door, at the door, hold on, about what they do not want to believe. Okay. And what is so close, containing the text of the protocols, was published a month before the abdication of the Emperor Nicholas II in 5,000 copies. The Masonic Provisional Government, which seized power, had among its first acts the issuing of an order signed by A.F. Kaczynski to destroy the entire circulation of this, quote, reactionary book. A team of uh, revolutionary soldiers came to the book warehouse, pulled them out, and burned them. From the entire circulation remained a little more than a tenth, about 600 copies. Quote, my book about the coming Antichrist, wrote in late 1917, Essay Nihilus, was published in January 1917, and on March 2nd in the same year, Tsar Nicholas abdicated the throne for himself and his son. The House of Romanov ceased to exist, and the provisional Russian government did not hesitate to declare Russia a republic. What my book predicted as possibly became a fast already committed, the property of the past. It is not necessary to be a prophet to predict the destruction of all monarchic states, not excluding the victorious Germany with its allies, and it will not pass away that a peaceful world congress, which expects the end of world catastrophe that is ongoing, but which is close to its final moment. By the word of St. Paul, and according to the holy tradition, the seizure of the restrainer represents the nearest and most important sign, a sign of the coming of the times when the lawless one will be revealed, whose coming, according to the action of Satan, will be accomplished by signs, wonders, false miracles, and unrighteousness, lost who will not accept the love of truth for their salvation. So I think that what's important to note here is that the czar represents the restrainer, right? And what he does is he's restraining the Antichrist forces in the world from taking over. So when he's taken out, what ends up happening, is I appreciate you tuning in. So what ends up happening is he's taken out. So before this time, the czar could go. Let's say like a heretic ascended a hierarchy in the church. The czar could get this person out of there. That was the purpose of monarchies. So you'd have, the state and the church working together. What the church would do would be like, okay, they would guide things as far as like uh, everybody towards salvation of their souls, but the government needed to step in sometimes. Like the state would have to step in sometimes if like heretics ascended the hierarchy, then they could take them out. Well, the Freemasons, I believe, noticed this, right? So they're like, we got to take out the czar because if we don't, he's going to keep us from ascending these hierarchies. He's going to take us out. He's going to hear about us doing this, and they're going to forcibly remove us. Well, once they take them out, guess what? They forcefully, they ascend the hierarchy. Now, in the past, when this would happen, like let's say with the Arians or whatever, that's what happened at the First Council of Nicaea. You got, Constantine there. He calls the council to put to rest this issue, this dispute, and he deems Arius a heretic, and he throws him out. Right? He throws all the Arians out those churches. We're in a position now that these people in world orthodoxy, Freemasons, have ascended their hierarchies. There's no monarch to throw them out. You know, so we're in some strange times. Okay, so, and they're not going to throw out themselves, so there's, like, there's people like, well, why don't the ecumenists, why don't we just throw out the ecumen? Who's going to throw them out? Themselves? Are they going to call a council on themselves and say, that's not going to happen? What's happened is they've set themselves up as patriarchs. Those patriarchs have put nothing but their people around them, and they police this stuff. They police being a part of the World Council of Churches. They and it's for worldly reasons, because they wanted closer relations with the West for financial purposes, to get, and not only that, that's why they push the branch theory. That's why the World Orthodox churches, they'll have to accept Protestant baptisms and different things like that, single immersion baptism, which that's not the form. If it was the form, maybe you could, accept those people through chrismation or something, or a confession of faith at least, or something. But that's not happening. They just have to outright accept like a Methodist baptism or something, Uh, so that's the state we're in. It says the provisional government not only sought to destroy the protocols of Zion, but also entrusted one of its commissioners, a prominent Masonic figure, C.G. Savitkov, to determine their origins. In summary of 1917, Savitkov went to Paris for the elimination of the Russian intelligence abroad. Along the way, tried to investigate the, quote, case of the protocols of Zion. Even then, this Masonic conspirator pushed the unsubstantiated version that they were fabricated by the Russian police, headed by the head of the Russian agency abroad, P.I. Rokovsky. Uh, Putting forward this version, Savitkov failed to cite a single piece of evidence except for the unsubstantiated denials of a certain Bent, a Russian agent in Paris, and a French citizen by Jewish origin. This Bent, after the disbandment of the Russian foreign intelligence, was in dire need of money and promised Savitkov for a long time to sell papers related to his work in Russian foreign agent. And among them, a certain, quote, Zion document. In an effort to lure more money out of Savitkov, he regularly, quote, fed him with promises and never fulfilled them. And the Zion document turned out to be a bluff, a list of several books on, quote, Jewish topics. Despite the persecution of the protocols, the provisional government could not stop their proliferation. Developments in the country which had consistently confirmed the, quote, killer truth of this document. In 1917, in Moscow, on Bolshaya Sodovoya Street, in the printing house, quote, Rushing Printing, an abridged version of the protocols was published. The popularity of the protocols in the Civil War, new editions of the document from Crimea, the Vladivostok, the struggle against them by Masonic white governments, the death penalty for keeping the protocols in Soviet Russia, Bolshevism as an embodiment of the protocol program, Zundera's secret document. During the Civil War, when many forecasts of the protocols came true, their popularity among the Russian people increased dramatically. Protocols were passed from hand to hand, rewritten and reprinted. From any edition of the books by Nihilus and Boutmy containing the protocols, there was a famous amount of money paid. New printed editions of the documents were also appearing. In the summer of 1918, the protocols were published in Russia and Moscow, and together with the officers who had gone to volunteer army were forwarded south. In the same year, in Novocherkassk, I don't know. Tens of thousands of copies were published as the Protocols of Zion, a plan for the conquest of the world by the Jays. Publisher I.A. Rodionov in Simferopol. Um, the same mass circulation and published a book printed on the print cigarette paper under title 13 Protocols of Zion, What a J Wants, What One Achieves. 26p publisher Ovad, with a short preface and afterword. So, by the way, I think Oleg Plantanov was arrested and, sent to prison for, uh, I think publishing this work. And what ended up happening is that the court couldn't end up doing anything to him because he was quoting uh, Jewish historians. And he was like, "Well, are you gonna?" They were basically what it was is like, "Are you going to basically lock these other guys up because this is where I'm getting this information?" And they couldn't deny it, so they were like, "Okay, so we got to let him go." But anyways, one by one in the period of 1918 through 1920, new editions of the protocols were published in Vladivostok, Irkutsk, Omsk, Roston-on-Don, Taganrog, uh, Khabarovsky, and elsewhere. A special edition of protocols was printed in Japan in Russian and shipped to the Russian Far East for distribution. In the White Army, protocols were distributed to officers and the most contentious part of the soldiers. However, the liberal Masonic leadership of the White Army, the government of Kolchak, and especially Wrangel, diligently prevented this. As Jewish researcher uh, Cherikover reports, quote, according to some reports in the beginning of 1919, a group of monarchists in Omsk led by Captain Krashenikov, tried to distribute protocols among the troops of the Admiral Kolchak and the population of Serbia. But Kolchak took decisive measures because he feared the public opinion of America, which he was guided by. In October 1919, the same Krashenikov, being in Vladivostok, stock, again tried to distribute protocols with a pogromic purposes, but foreign missions intervened and the protocols were as if confiscated by the police. An even more active fight against the spread of protocols were conducted by the government of General Wrangler, in which the key role played prominent figures of Judaism, M.M. Weinerwer, and Freemasonry, P.B. Struve, N.S. Tagnastev, M.B. Bernovsky. This is what one of Ragnall's officers called Colonel A. Dorinen remembered about it. In 1920, I was the head of Simferopol branch of the political part of the headquarters of the commander-in-chief. During the summer, the month date I do not remember, Wrangler passing through Simferopol called me urgently to the station in his train, and I appeared and was introduced to his salon carriage by the aide in the commander-in-chief. Wrangler suggested I sit down and said, "Let me shave in your presence, Colonel, or I won't have another stop on the way. I need a shave. As long as I'm shaving, you and I will talk." I sat down in the chair I was offered, and the commander-in-chief, while preparing, asked, "Are you familiar with this brochure, Colonel?" At the same time, he pointed to a small round table standing in the corner of the salon, on which lay some unbound book. I looked in the direction in his hand immediately recognized by the cover of the quote protocols, which I saw the day before in the hands of a newspaper seller offering them to the public coming out of the Metropole Hotel after the lecture. When asked by General Wrangler, I asked an affirmative. "And who's distributing them in town?" The commander-in-chief asked. "I don't know who distributes them in the city," I replied, "but yesterday at a lecture in Metropole, I saw them sold by a newspaper boy whose name I don't know, but I didn't know his name and his face and could find out." "So what does the governor do?" asked Wrangel. "The governor is inactive. The vice-governor is encouraging the sale I witnessed yesterday." "Do you report this to HQ?" "That's right, and I sent an urgent report on this today." Then the general moved on other topics, and 5 minutes later, I left the car and the commander-in-chief. When I got to my office, I literally didn't get to my desk before the phone rang. The vice-governor called. Quote, "Is it true, Colonel, that the commander-in-chief asked you about the protocols?" he asked. I confirmed that this was indeed the case, and in response to the confirmation, I heard the lieutenant governor's question on the phone in a perspirally inept way. Why not sell them? On the phone went off. Soon I learned that the lieutenant governor had been fired and had seen no more, quote, protocols on the open market in the city. In Soviet Russia, according to the decree of the Council of People's Commissary of 1918, an explanation of the People's Commissariat of Justice, the storage and dissemination of the protocols was to be punished by the death penalty without trial. Keepers of this document were equated to bandits and bombers and immediately shot at the nearest wall. This reaction of the Soviet government to the protocols were primarily due to the national composition. 90% of it was composed of Jays, an extreme anti-Christian and anti-Russian orientation. The Jewish Bolsheviks saw the danger of revealing their secret machinations in the propagation of the protocols. Terror and famine, as the main methods of governing the hostile Russian people, were disclosed in the protocols long before the rise to power by Jewish Bolsheviks. Many prominent minds of the time directly linked Bolshevik politics to the program of the protocols. Bolshevism, wrote Henry Ford, a prominent American entrepreneur, for example. He says, quote, has an international program of protocols. Russian action is just an international rehearsal. Ford saw the idea of a world revolution as a form of a world Jewish kingdom. A number of publishers of the protocols directly linked Bolshevism to the Jewish program of the protocols. In 1919, in Yokohama, the publisher D. Uralits, publishing house Eureka, published a brochure in the Russian entitled Bolshevism and You, 24 Protocols on the Zionists. So is in the source OP, Congress in Basel in 1897, on the publication of S. Nihilus. And afterwards it noted, quote, 3 years of revolutionary decline has passed over our homeland. Centuries of sweeping and shuffling have passed. Intellectuals have been cut off. People have been feral and are dying out. It is the very heart of our country, wherein the formation is shrouded in mystery. The same agents of Zion nest themselves about whom so much has been said in the protocols of the Zionists. Now it can be categorically stated that the people at the head of Bolshevism, the inspirers of it, are the Zionist agents. In the same year of 1919, in Kobrovsky, someone published a brochure entitled, quote, The Documentary Data Proving the Origin of Bolshevism and What Bolshevism Really Strives For. In the preface in the publication was stated that the record minutes of 24 meetings of the leaders of Zionist and Masonic organizations were stolen from in Paris by a French woman in 1902. The ideas of the protocols were very popular among Jewish Bolsheviks and the top leadership of the Red Army, which at that time consisted mostly of Jays. In December 1919, in the Battle of the Estonian border, Battalion Commander Zunder of the 11th Red Army Rifle Regiment died. In his belongings, a suspicious document was found with a sign, quote, secret in the Jewish language. The local authorities translated the document and published it into Estonian newspapers, Postumies in Jurajova, Dorpata, and Tazitka in Revel. In March 1920, this document appeared in the English newspaper, quote, Morning Post, and later in several other publications. This secret document found in particular to representatives of the Department of the International Jewish Union. Sons of Israel, the hours of our ultimate victory is near. We stand on the eve of world domination. What we could only dream of is now becoming reality. Until recently, the weak, helpless, and now we are proud to raise our heads in thanks to the general world collapse. However, we must be careful, for it is safe to predict that after stepping over the broken altars and thrones, we must even go further on the path we have planned. We have mercilessly criticized and ridiculed the authority and the beliefs of the relations alien to ours through successful propaganda and exposés. We have overthrown the shrines of others. We have shaken their culture and traditions in the nations and states. We made everything to subordinate Russian people to the Jewish power and to force it at last to become ours before our knees. We have almost achieved all this. However, we must be careful because our original enemy is enslaved Russia. Victory over it, achieved by our genius, may one day in the new generations turn against us. Wow. Trying to figure it all out. It's the same old spiritual war going on, but the wars within those wars. Well, yeah, I would say that we're kind of dealing with almost a February revolution right now. The same Bolshevik revolution is happening in America, and it's being propagated through media, and um, yeah, a lot of these YouTube channels and influencers are pretty, whether they know it or not. I think some might not know, but they've bought into the propaganda. You know, evil document is the protocols on there. So soul, living spark of God. I'd say they're kind of a part of this same type of thing going on. With the Jesuits and the Zionists. They have a very similar. They're both secret societies. They both are. I think everybody's kind of pushing for this one world government. It's just the one who can, you know, get to it first. And well, know, this aspect of why it's confusing is because they want it to be, and that's to put you in a state of despair. So you just kind of give up. And I think that these people kind of replicate what demons do because they're influenced by demonic forces, and the demons are constantly, trying to confuse us and put us in a state of despair. So yeah, that's what I see about all this, and it's just going to eventually lead to this, one world everything, one world government, one world church, and then you'll have Antichrist come on the scene, and there'll be people out there, I guarantee you, supposed Orthodox Christians who are going to call them canonical, and the Antichrist is, from what I understand about it, the Antichrist is going to allow people to have their religions as long as they bow to him, you know. Uh, and that's kind of what the ecumenical movement is. It's like you can still be Orthodox, but as long as you are part of our World Council of Churches, Uh, but even the name itself goes against our creed because we say there's only one church. A World Council of Churches states that there's more than one church. So, anyways, the triumphant march of the protocols around the world, translations to all major languages, numerous publications, mass circulation, the decisive role of the Russian monarchists, the world's secret conspiracy becomes public, the quote, covenants of salvation of Russia and the yoke of the Jays, appeal to the Antichrist by Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich. In the summer of 1919, the protocols crossed Russia's borders and began to spread rapidly in Western Europe and America. The first foreign edition of the protocols appeared in Germany. It was carried out by the prominent public figure Gottfried Zerbeck, editor of the magazine of Ulf Forposten. Zerbeck provided his addition to the protocols, translated from the book of Nihilus, 1911, with the extensive preface and commentary. The book was a resounding success and was instantly sold out. In the same year of 1919, the publisher issued two more copies of this book, and they too quickly sold out. In 1920, Zerbeck carried out three editions of protocols and then again successfully sold out. In the 20s and early 30s, Zerbeck published 12 more editions of the protocols, and they all also quickly sold out. The protocols were taken then by becoming well known to many German statesmen. In the Reichstag, the Count of Reventov openly read them. In 1920, the head of Gammer Publishing House, Leipzig, I don't know, Dr. Theodor Fritsch became the publisher of the protocols in German. He published the protocols in somewhat reduced form, making them truly a mass publication. A few months after the first German edition of the protocols, Zerbeck published their Polish edition. The Catholic priest Edward Ardward became their translator and publisher. Their publication was followed by a new Polish edition and a number of copies. Since 1920, the protocols were published in many publications in English, French, and Italian. In the English, in 1920 and 1924, three translations of the protocols were published at once. Okay, and published at once, each which had several editions. One of them was made by Victor Marsden, a former Petrograd correspondent from the English newspaper Morning Post, who by some miracle managed to avoid death in the walls of the Czech and learned from his experience the character of the Jewish world order established in Russia. Many Englishmen were impressed by the reading of the protocols. The English newspaper Morning Post and the Times placed a number of articles demanding investigation into the world J's conspiracy. Did we avoid Pax Germanica at the cost of the extreme tension in the entire state body just to fall under Pax Judaica? The Times asked anxiously. The Morning Post published a series of articles about the protocols of Zion, including their almost complete text, which were subsequently published as a separate book, quote, The Cause of World Unrest. The articles argued convincingly that Bolshevism in Russia should be seen as the result of a, quote, Jayish conspiracy. Even Winston Churchill warned about the, quote, danger of being captured by the Jays. Quote, What strikes the reader most strongly in the protocols, wrote Lord Sydenham, Sydenham, excuse me, in 1921. The answer reads, quote, a rare knowledge of a special kind that covers the broadest areas. To solve this mystery, if it is such a mystery, it is necessary to find the source of this exact knowledge, which is that's so absurd. The basis of predictions that now come true exactly as written. In the United States, the protocols were first distributed in Boston under the name, quote, The Protocols of the World Revolution. Henry Ford took the book under his patronage in his own newspaper. Quote, hold on. uh, okay. What's up, man? Germanus? Okay, we got Orthodox outcasts. I think what's shocking to some people is this protocol style system has been ongoing since the time of Venetians descended to the Amorites battle against the Christendom holy. Yeah, I would agree. You know, it's pretty wild. Uh, yeah. Okay. So, what strikes the reader most strongly in Protocols wrote Lord. No, I'm not going to read that again. Okay. In the United States, the protocols were first distributed in Boston under the name, quote, The Protocols of the World Revolution. Henry Ford took the book under his patronage in his own newspaper, quote, Dearborn Index. Circulation 300,000 copies. Protocols were not only published but also commented on in great detail. These comments were subsequently published as a book in 4 volumes under the title International Jewry. That book had a circulation of about 500,000 copies. The book, translated into many European languages, became spread quickly around the world. In addition to G. Ford himself, this outstanding book was prepared by such prominent specialists as Dr. August Muller, Dr. Rumley, F. Leibold, Secretary of G. Ford, Russian writer B. Brazil, Count A. Cherub, Spiridonovich. As G. Ford wrote in his book, quote, even in the conditions of publicity in the U.S., there's a real fear of the Jays, a fear that is clearly felt, the reason for which has not must be found out. The protocol program, Ford thought, is already on its way to a successful conclusion. In many of its main features, it has already become a reality. But we should be neither anxious nor frightened for a living instrument against it, both in parts already completed and unfinished, has wide publicity. The people must know. The methods of the plan set forth and protocols are to maintain anxiety, to sow anxiety, and to awaken passion among the nations. To anecdote is to educate the peoples. Enlightenment and other hand drives out prejudice. Achieving this is good for Jays and non-Jays alike. Jays writers often abuse the fact that they present the case as if this is prejudice on one side only. The protocols must now be widely circulated among the Jewish people themselves so they themselves can take action against the suspicions that lead other peoples to treat them with suspicion. So yeah, I think there's a kind of a middle path here that we have to walk. We can't, there's a difference between being anti-Semitic and being anti-heretic. And what we're seeing with these protocols is that it's pointing out Zionism and an anti-Christian worldview. It has nothing to do with a particular race of people, right? It just so happens that these particular people are pushing this, this Talmudic anti-Christian world domination plot, and it's through Freemasonry. So there's not that's not really a surprise, right? And but yeah, we definitely have to distinguish between the two because you can go overboard with it. I definitely think so, and that's not my intention of reading this. I don't have anything necessarily against Jays, but I do have something against heretics. Yeah. One moment. Okay. Yeah. So that's that. I just wanted to make that clear because it can go overboard, and there are people that sort of are pretty racist. You know what I mean? And that's not the position of any Orthodox Christian. If anything, we want them to come to the truth. Those that are maybe involved in this type of stuff. But like he's saying here, they need to know why people are looking at them suspiciously, and it's because these secret societies behind the scenes. With no less speed, the protocols were distributed in France only in 1920. Several translations into French were published in that country. The first translation was printed from the issue to issue for almost a month by newspaper Libre Password. Almost simultaneously, but in another translation, the protocols appeared in the magazine Le Vie France called, quote, The Conspiracy of Jays Against Humanity, the Protocols of the Israeli Sages. On the pages of the same magazine, for the first time, began the publishing work of the famous researcher of the protocols, I. Fry Urban Goyer, played a significant role in the work of Louvieux France. The main center for the study of the protocols of Zion on France was the team of authors grouped around the magazine International Review of the Secret Societies, published by a Catholic priest of St. Augustine's Church in Paris, Juin 1922. Since 1920, Juin, uh, Juin was preparing a series of texts under the generational title Judeo Masonic Danger. 4 books in this series were devoted to the questions about the protocols of Zion and the relationship between Judaism with Freemasonry. Juan published various versions of the Protocols of Zion, including the publication of G.W. Boutme, and gave extensive commentary on them. His untimely, mysterious death prevented him from fulfilling all his plans. The first volume of Juan's works, with the translation of the 1911 text in dialects, except for the serial edition, was published separately. Only in 1920 he published 5 editions. Um, the classic French edition of the Protocols was the translation of R. Limbelin, published in 1921 by the largest French publishing house, Grenard Grasset. The book was provided with a good preface. Its success surpassed all expectations, and by 1921 there were 16 editions, all of this translation from 1922 to 1925, 19 more. In the 20s, the protocols were translated into all major languages of the world, in addition to the above. Their translations into Swedish, Danish, Finnish, Hungarian, Lithuanian, Bulgarian, Spanish, Romanian, Serbian, New Greek, Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, and several editions. Watching a triumphal procession of the protocols in many countries of the world, one inevitably marks its spread with Russian immigration. Thousands of highly educated people who have experienced all the hardships of the criminal regime of the Jayish Bolsheviks and forced under the threat of death to leave their homeland became the main specialists in the theory and practice of the protocols. Many of them, coming out of skepticism towards the document, became ardent advocates of its veracity. In Berlin in 1919 and through 1920, an informal Russian Czech Center for Promotion of the Protocols were established. In particular, it was attended by prominent Russian public figures and writers, Senator A. Rogovich, Colonels F. Winberg, G. Uh, Bostunich, P. Shabolivsky Bork. These people became chief advisors and assistants to German protocol publishers and above to G. Zerbeck. Winberg and Shabelsky Bork founded the monarchist magazine, quote, Ray of Light, in 1919. In the first issue, which was printed a program article about the Jewish conspiracy against the Christian world, abundantly quoting the Zionist protocols. The third issue of this journal included the entire protocols in an eyeless edition. The version of the protocols published in the third issue of Ray of Light has become a kind of benchmark for many foreign publications. Senator Rogovich issued the protocols under the title, quote, The Secret World Conspiracy, Steyag Publishing House, Berlin, in 1922. The book was provided with a large preface in which Rodovich gave a thorough analysis of the Jewish program to combat the Christian world, revealed the main stages of its zeal in life, appealing to all the politicians of the world. Ronovich warned about the impending danger of the establishment of a Jewish world order, advising each of them to familiarize themselves with the protocols of Zion. In the United States, the main advisors of the American publisher of the protocol were Regis Boris Brozal and Count Artemy Spiridovich. In 1921, the Society of, quote, Russian Self-Defense in New York published an American edition of the protocols in Russian under the name like Rodovich, quote, World Secrets Conspiracy. Skoll edited the magazine, Save Russia, The Origin of All Who Are Sincerely Love Russia, in which the protocols were constantly quoted. English publishers and propagandists of the protocols, above all V. Martinson, kept in constant contact with the Russian monarchists as early as autumn of 1919. Russian monarchists entered into the polemics with liberal Masonic circles in Britain on the nature of Bolshevik power. In 1920, a large English newspaper at the time were publications under the pseudonyms for Denikin, quote, Ivan Ivanovich Vercox, in which was proclaimed the Bolshevik world conspiracy of the JS International against the whole Christian world in confirmation of the facts of a monstrous crime of JS Bolshevism in our country. The protocols were quoted. In France, numerous editions of the protocols were published in a huge number, also owed much to the Russian monarchists. Most active promoters of protocols there were General A. Nikovolodov, A. Stepanov, N.F. Stepanov, Shikov, and later Prince M.K. Chakov. General A. Nikovolodov collaborated with the newspaper Libre Password, which produced the first French translation of the protocols. Apparently, this translation was carried out with the direct participation in the general in 1924. Nikovolodov published a book in French entitled Nicholas II and the Jays, Essay on the Russian Revolution and its relationship to worldwide activities of modern Judaism, in which the protocols were studied in detail. Prince M.K. Gorkakov established in Paris a monarchical publishing house, quote, Down with Evil, which in 1927 published the protocols from the book by Nihilus in 1911. In the publisher's preface, it was noted that the, quote, program of invasion of states and peoples was carried out by the various Jewish power on behalf of which the program of protocols was announced. The appearance of this government, the Jewish clique of terrorists, speaks for itself. This villainous gang of Jays achieved in 1917 despotic power over 150 million Russian people, only because Jays have always had their own Zion program, and this misanthropic program was and is carried out by Jays with iron, not retreating persistency. On the cover of this edition of the Protocols, Prince Gorkakov placed an authentic photograph of the Soviet government, from which the reader was looked at by a directly Jayish type headed by Trotsky and Sverdlov. Even in Japan, a monarchical center was being formed which set itself the task of, quote, countering the terrible Jayish threat. One of the Russian expats who spoke under the pseudonym of D. Uralets published the protocols and began to publish in Yokohama magazine. Um, ZDI Revolution. Articles of this magazine were translated and distributed in many countries of the world. Monarchical groups to disseminate and promote the protocols also exist in Chinese cities as Harbin and Shanghai. A whole Russian monarchist in Europe, America, and Asia managed to awaken public opinion to make public the sinister plans of the authors of the protocols. During the first half of the 20s, tens of millions of people throughout the world were awakened to this plot. Okay, so I'm going to take 1 second real quick. So, let me see something. All right, so this is what we're going to do. If you've been around the show, this little reading thing I do, you've heard this little tune I do to kind of step away for a moment. Okay, all right. So, all right. So, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think it's very prevalent. I think that, the majority of cops and politicians and entertainers are involved in masonry. So, yeah. And it's being propagated online as well. And they've infiltrated orthodoxy, and they're pushing this utopian ideal of theistic evolution. So, this utopia. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. No, it's not ended. Yeah, it's wild stuff. Okay, so in 1920, the Jewish organization throughout Europe and America became a broad campaign to discredit the protocols. This campaign involved hundreds of political and public figures, writers, and newspapers. On the signal, an invisible conductor began to assert the fraudulent and unreliable nature of the protocols, claiming completely without proof that they were, quote, drawn up by Russian police to justify the repression of the Jays. The campaign was launched by the famous Jewish activist Lucien Wolff, who, with the money of the Rothschilds, published two thin propaganda pamphlets that could not convince anyone and went virtually unnoticed. In December 1920, the Jewish organization held a conference in New York and issued a special declaration against the protocols, which claimed that the document was fake. The declaration was signed by the leaders of the largest Jewish organization in the world. The appeal against the quote anti Semitism and accusation of the Jays in the world conspiracy was made by representatives of Masonic lies and prominent U.S. politicians, Masons, Woodrow Wilson, T. Roosevelt, Taft, and Bryan. On behalf of Jewish organizations, the Jewish Freemasonic journalist Herman Bernstein, in cooperation with certain Shapiro, began a trial against G. Ford, demanding that he renounce his beliefs. At this stage, Jewish organizations failed to intimidate Ford, and the trial failed. Since 1921, with the money of international Jewish bankers, a number of dubious books have been prepared and published, whose authors did not squail the grossest lies and outright falsifications in order to prove that the protocols had nothing to do with Jewry, but was a forgery of anti Semitics. One of the first books that took up the task by one G. Bernstein, in which he unreasonably attributed the authorship of the protocols to Ludostansky. This weak pseudoscientific pamphlet could not convince anyone, and on the works of L. Wolf that preceded it sank into oblivion. The work of the same nature by G. Strack, professor of theology at Berlin University, was published. Of the 40 pages of the booklet, two were devoted to the protocols, which were declared a forgery without any explanation. With the aims of discrediting the protocols, representatives of the Jewish organization committed real forgery. They hired people who, for a large sum of money, agreed to give false testimony. The protocols were, quote, fabricated in the depths of the Russian police under the direction of General Rokokovsky. As false witnesses, these three dubious personalities, adventurers, and passerbyers had been found. The French by origin, Edu Sheila, Princess Rodzaville, and G. Herblet. With regards to the first two, the well-known Masonic historian B. Nukolovsky expressed the following opinion, quote, D. Cholet, a passerby, but to parse his role as well as the role of Prince Radziwill, I will not. First, they were in the camp of Semitic Radziwill, apparently a German spy, Bulova. Uh, Editors note, unclear what this means. A scenario is being written for these false witnesses, according to which all of them claimed that the protocols were drawn up by agents of the Russian police. And it's essay 9, received them in 1904 through 1905, but the police general Rokokovsky, all three, quote, dispositions provide a mass of made up details that are easily disproven when compared to other sources. Those that wish to call the document a forgery show amazing ignorance. These historians did not know that protocols began to be spread in Russia 10 years earlier than they claimed. They had been published at least 5 times before they appeared in the book by Nihilus. By adjusting the facts of the protocols to Nihilus, the uninformed falsifiers were immediately caught in the act. Since Nihilus was not the first publisher of the protocols, and the claims of the false witnesses are shown groundless. These witnesses claim that General Rokovolsky allegedly handed over the protocols to Nihilists in 1904 through 1905. The protocols are then claimed to be the work of a police agent, M. Golovinsky, who allegedly compiled the document. It is absolutely ridiculous to attribute to Nihilists a role in a palace intrigue. The perjury campaign began its largest in the Jewish publication America Hebrew, USA, and a Jewish Tribune, a weekly newspaper devoted to the interests of Russian Jews, Paris, and then likewise was picked up by a number of liberal Masonic magazines like P. Milikov's Last News, which repeated all perjuous statements published early in the aforementioned Jewish newspapers. In autumn 1921, the JS organization began a new campaign discrediting the protocols. This time, the signal to the offensive was the publication of the, quote, Times article by an anonymous Constantinople correspondent. The unnamed correspondent reported that the mysterious H.A. Russian citizen had come to him and told him that he had recently purchased from an unknown officer of the Russian security department who had fled Russia a collection of old books, among of which was a book by M. Joly titled, quote, Dialogue. H noticed immense similarities between the protocols and found many textual coincidences in them. This led to the conclusion that the protocols are a plagiarism of Joly's dialogue. As I've shown above, both the protocols, the dialogue had a common primary source, which was also the basis for other J.S. Masonic documents, such as the secret papers of A. Weishaupt, the Carbonari, and the Alliance of International Brothers, and other similar organizations. The fact that no specific surname was mentioned in the Times, and that everyone involved in the story was shrouded in mystery, suggested that the findings of Joly's dialogue was not accidental. It is possible to believe that a certain policeman who fled Russia would bring with him books that he didn't need, and among them the dialogue, the contents of which the officer didn't know, and the language in which he was written he didn't speak. Apparently, the situation was different. There was no unnamed correspondent, no mysterious H, no one police officer, and a dialogue Jolie, surely known to the chiefs of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, was raised from oblivion, but to them to discredit the protocols of Zion. The charge of plagiarism undermined the credibility of this serious document and led to it being treated as something that did not deserve attention, and the fact that the dialogue was the same product of Jewish Talmudic thought as the protocols of Zion. Of course, the Jewish leaders were silent. Immediately after the publication in the, quote, Times newspaper, the, quote, Jewish Tribune published an article titled The End of the Protocols. The author, hiding on the initials E.T., stated categorically, the protocols are plagiarized from Joly's dialogue. They were fabricated in a Russian court, reactionary circles to fight the liberals and to put pressure on the Tsar. The plagiarism was done hastily and carelessly. Some parts of the protocols are taken from the dialogue, probably supplemented by concerns of the security police. The article from the Times was then reprinted by the latest news. Moreover, P. Milikov issues this article as a brochure. The, quote, Truth about the Protocol's literary forgery, which is rather confusing preface at the beginning. Another former officer of provisional government, Commissioner S. Savitkov, also contributed to discrediting the protocols of Zion. He agreed with the hearsay that the protocols of Zion were allegedly fabricated by Roskovsky, but failed to substantiate his claims. Moreover, he embarked on the path of a direct falsification, stating that P.E. Skukolev, who on behalf of the provisional government in 1917 reviewed the records and archives of the police department, and found information already in 1917 that the protocols were a forgery made in Paris. In fact, neither P. Shikolov nor any other researchers in this day have ever found in the archives of the police department any documents relating to the creation of the protocols. Almost all the specialists who were hired by JS organizations to discredit the protocols were surprisingly superficial and light-minded in their history and analytical assessments. Many performers of the special order did not even bother to properly read the protocols and to trace their history back to the original sources. A striking example of this, quote, work was the book, quote, The Protocols of the Zion Sages, A Story of Deception, Berlin, 1923, written in order that the book was frankly deceitful and confusing, and author L. Udalovsky was afraid to put his name and published it under the pseudonym of U. The first chapter of the book began with the grossest mistake. The author claimed that the, quote, first edition of the Protocols was issued by Sergei Nihilus in 1902. A few lines later, the author made another, no less serious mistake, claiming that the first edition of the Protocols of Zion were published by Boutmy, appeared in 1907. Udalovsky's work was a polemic pamphlet in which he tried to convince the leaders of Jays loved other nations and did not seek world domination. The author almost vehemently retold the contents of the articles of the, quote, Time, as well as perjuous statements of Roosevelt, Du Chaillet, and Herblit, and declared the protocols of plagiarism and forgery of Rakovsky. Almost simultaneously with Udalovsky's work, another similar book by a certain B appeared, Schergel's, quote, Protocols of the Sage of Zion, which was quite surprisingly mixed with confusing information about the Protocols of Zion with data in Judaism and Zionist revolutionary movements. Studying such books, one wonders why Jewish organizations have not managed to find serious authors to study the evaluate the protocols and funded the publication of Frank Hack work. The Jewish organization declared an all-out war to the largest propagandist and distributor of the protocols, G. Ford. Failing to defeat him in court, Jewish activists organized a campaign of harassment and intimidation. The largest Jewish bankers arranged an economic blockade of his enterprises, a result of which Ford suffered huge losses. Thousands of threatening letters were sent to the Car King. In 1925, an assassination attempt was organized on Ford on way to Dearborn, where the editorial office of the newspaper, quote, Dearborn Intex, and the warehouse of the book, quote, International Jerry, was located. His car was hit by a truck. It was only by a miracle that Ford managed to avoid death. Already by the evening, he received an anonymous note stating that the next assassination attempt would be successful. In fear for his life and capital, Ford threw a white flag. On June 30th, 1927, he sent a letter to the president of the American Jewish Committee, Louis Marshall, in which he denied his views and apologized to the Jays. The next day, trucks hired by Jays organizations drove up to Dearborn Intex office and book warehouse. All of the books produced by Ford were taken to the wasteland and burned. Moreover, Ford's books were sent out to libraries in the United States suffered the same fate. The Department of Justice sent a circular letter to all libraries and educational institutions of the United States recommending the removal of protocols from their collections. In assistance of the Jays, Ford ordered the destruction of the books, International Jewry in Europe as well. Increase in circulation protocols in response to the fraudulent Jewish organization. Leslie Fry's version, assumption about the authorship of the protocols. Adab Gam, withdrawal of the suit in court caused by Jewish organizations to ban the distribution of the protocols. The division of Zionist conference in Basel to start a lawsuit. Establishment of a Jewish center group to organize the trial of the protocols. Preparation of public opinion. The history of the origin of the protocols put forward by Jewish organizations was not regarded as credible by most. Most of the readers of this document were skeptical of the works of the Jewish authors. The contents of the protocols confirmed by the events of world history did not fit into the poor explanations of the commissioned Jewish brochures. Moreover, the overwhelming number of people perceived these explanations as one more attempt by the Jewish circle to deceive the public. The efforts of the Jewish organizations to falsify the origin of the Zionist protocols had elicited the opposite reaction in many countries. interesting, the protocols were growing. The number of publications were increasing, and the circulation exceeded millions. The mysteries of the origins of the protocols continue to excite the minds of many people. Unbiased and uncorrupted historians persistently seek an answer to the question of exactly who drafted the Protocols of Zion in the first half of the 1920s. Perhaps the most popular answer to this question was Leslie Fry's version. Leslie Fry's life is shrouded in a fog of mystery. No one knows about her real origins from the fact that she knew Russian well. We assume that she lived in Russia. It's reported that she took an active part in a literary campaign against the Bolsheviks in Europe and America. After the revolution, she hid her real name under the pseudonym. Until 1921, Fry lived in France, then moved to the United States, where she collaborated with G. Ford. In the United States, Fry married a Russian immigrant, Shismarev. In 1925 to 1926, she went to Russia in connection with Ford's process on the protocols to secretly see nihilists and bring evidence of the authenticity of this document. She was not able to see Nihilus, but only talked to his wife and did not receive any new information. In 1921, Fry published an article in the journal LV France about the origin of the protocols, claiming that their author was Ahad Ham Ginsburg and that the original was written in Hebrew. Fry's view was long accepted by many promoters and distributors of the protocols. After many years of the work, Fry had produced a generalizing work on the problems of the protocols of Zion, which is becoming a kind of reference book for anyone interested in this document. The book was the first to publish the testimony of the first publisher of the Protocols of Zion, F.P. Stepanov, and attached a portrait of Nihilus. In 1922, all of Germany was agitated by the sensational accusations of the famous German monarchist Count Reventlow against the Jewish writer Oel Ginsberg, who spoke under the pseudonym Ahad Ham. Rentalov declared Ginsburg a participant in the secret meetings of Jewish conspirators and named him as a co-author of the protocols. According to German newspapers, Ginsburg threatened to bring the Earl to court for libel.
So we're going to do the hour compliment.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm down.
I'm down now.
All right, I'll be right back. Okay, and Granville's trial was being prepared as the newspaper Jewish Tribune, 1922, number 112, wrote, quote, "The best representatives of German Jewry will be at this trial next to Abraham Ham at the very last moment." However, the Jewish writer withdrew his suit. It turned out that in this stage, Rentalov relied on articles by French researcher Fry, the author of the Protocols of Ham, Zionism. Brilliantly revealing the criminal anti-human nature of Judaism and Zionism, Fry nevertheless failed to find convincing evidence of authorship of the protocols by Aham Gam. The emergence of new studies and material on the question of the protocols does not allow us today to say that they were written in Hebrew. Neither does Fry's information that the protocols were known in Odessa back in 1890. Most likely, we're talking about some other document similar to them, such as the famous, quote, rabbi speech. Masonic Lodge, B'nai Moshe, Fry calls it B'nai Moshe, had nothing more to do with the creation of the protocols than any other JS Masonic Lodge, which existed in the framework of the general ideology that was preached by the protocols. Nevertheless, Fry's research has played a major role in correctly assessing the significance of the protocols and understanding the misanthropic ideology of their authors. Not without reason, Ginsburg did not dare to sue Fry, knowing that the public hearing of this case would lead to unwanted publicity of the secret plans of leaders of the Judeo-Talmudic world order. Glory to God. Okay, so we got through it, and I appreciate everybody that came through. How old am I? What? Weird question. Yeah, for real. I'm not telling you that. But yeah, after posting that question, I realized I knew the answer. The better question would have been, how prevalent are they in the government today? Such using my honor know the answer too. I'm the short boss. You're fine. I think the only thing we can do with these answers is urge our brothers and sisters in Christ be aware of the ongoing spiritual wherever corner, no place in it anymore. I agree. Swords in high gear for sure these days. Quite a division. Many have deaf ears, but stay vigilant and devotional love for Christ. Absolutely. All right, so I got comp line, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in. We got through the whole paper, so yeah. I mean, I would say that we're in the midst of another kind of February Revolution in the United States, and there's many people pushing propaganda, and I would say be aware of what's going on. And it's kind of strange that you're here if you're actually who I think you are. So, anyways, have a nice night.